Welcome back to Neurodiverse Christian Couples. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Dan.
And today we have two guests with us, Shawna and Kevin. Welcome, y'all.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Now, you may have remember Shawna. She was back on an episode a couple of weeks ago on betrayal trauma, but today is the rest of the story. Kevin is here to tell us his part of the story. So before we start into it, Kevin, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, awesome. I think Shauna mentioned a little bit in our story, a little unique in that we've been married, divorced, and remarried. And so at the age of 50, I was diagnosed with autism, so a late diagnosis for that. But I think really kind of saw signs of that throughout my life, and especially after a diagnosis, was able to go back and look at a lot of things that then started to make sense. And so we've been navigating that now for almost a year and a half, and really just finding ways to incorporate that and look at how we do our relationship and recovery and all of that differently.
So how are we going to decide how to do it?
You go.
Okay, I'm going. All right. We are really off the game tonight. All right. So, and starting off with that part of the story of your late in life diagnosis, continuing from our part one, it was about betrayal trauma and it was about the sex addiction, which I'll have a little note about that at the end as to why we are doing these topics. What do you kind of want to share, Kevin, kind of about your story and your journey through this process from the marriage struggles to the infidelity to the remarriage? What are kind of key points?
Yeah, I think that many times throughout our relationship, we found ourselves struggling in connecting emotionally and at a deep level in our relationship. And I think that we have tried numerous different types of counseling. We've couples counseling, individual counseling. We've done it all. And I think for me, the struggle was is I would come home and we'd give it a whirl and it would work for a few weeks, maybe a few months if we were lucky. And then it just wasn't working anymore. And the connection was lost. We were not having that intimate connection together. And really, I think the struggle was there was there was a desire there, but it was just not clicking. And I've used the analogy sometimes of like magnets that are opposite, and you're trying to force those magnets together to get them to connect. And there was just it felt like this force that was almost keeping us from being able to connect of something that we both wanted so desperately. And really, I think for lack of a better word, that force was really the autism that was there. It was the lack of attunement. It was the lack of empathy. The theory of mind, alexithymia, a lot of those things that come with that. And so for us, that diagnosis really opened some doors and shed some light on some struggles that we were having for decades together.
So you mentioned the desire. So talk about that. Talk about early on what kept this moving. Why pursue well into 20, 30 years? What what was the reason to keep going?
Do you want me to share?
Sure.
Okay. I would say as we look back at like the whole journey, there was a little bit of cyclicalness of kind of cycles in our connection and then lack of connection. And when he's referring to intimacy, we're talking about kind of that depth, not just sexual intimacy, but a lot of depth of connectivity and knowing one another. And the thing that kept us, I think, going was our willingness. There was a lot of times where we would use the like thought of, are we willing to do this? How much are we investing in this relationship? The ability was lacking at times and like trying to figure out how do we do this? But the willingness was, it was present most of the time, I would say. And that was probably the biggest factor that kept us like determined and persevering. And then even in those moments when I was like, I'm done. Like I can't keep going on these cycles. Truly like having the Lord as, just our foundation and saying, even in times where I just wanted to, you know, kind of back up and say, like, I can't do this anymore, was the strength of the Lord, truly, like that would just give us that motivation, and we try and come together, try and find something new or different that we hadn't looked at before. And so that really helped in a lot of our story because, even with the betrayal trauma piece, which people can listen to that first episode to hear more of that, but that layer of it took a lot of trust building for Kevin. And then it also created a lot more disjointed attachment for me with him that I had even early on that would connect to him more. And then that desire would want to pull away because I wasn't sure, like, is he emotionally safe for me right now? And I just couldn't decipher what was what. So it was a whole complicated layer with the, I would say the, addiction side of it, the infidelity, that piece of it, in addition to what we now know was autism. So.
Yeah, I think the one part that I would also add to that is, I mentioned briefly our story is, we were married, divorced, and then remarried. And so that determination wasn't there the first time. That commitment, that drive, that passion and that pursuit to make this work wasn't there the first time. And I did leave. And that was looking back, I think it was definitely some autistic meltdown through that of not being able to cope, not being able to navigate, not being able to know how to be in a relationship in a relationship that was having difficulties. And so when we remarried and then had infidelity in there and had those struggles hit, I was determined not to do the same thing again. And I can even remember sometimes where Shawna might have even said, I can't do this. And I said, well, I'm not leaving again. Like I'm doing this almost like this arrogant determination in a way, like, well, I'm not going to do that. And so I think that was part of it. And I was a little older the second time, and just I think knew that there were better decisions to make.
So go there a little bit more. If you weren't as determined the first time as you were the second time, what do you attribute the difference to?
Well, therapy. I think I worked through a lot of self-worth issues. I think being able to navigate some of those. As I look back to my childhood, I think about some emotional neglect, some emotional abandonment in growing up and in relationship, and that just set me off to a tough road. And I think that adding on top of that, um, while my diagnosis for autism was late in life, it wasn't like I didn't not have it until then. I had that as a child. And so I think having autism, having those struggles socially and in a relationship, and then having what I would say a a poor model of relationship with emotional neglect and abandonment added on top of that. Um, I recognized that through the first divorce. I recognized that and saw that leaving wasn't going to solve any of that. Leaving wasn't going to change that. And I knew that while it was painful the first time with a divorce and remarriage and all of that, um, I guess I kind of already knew what that pain looked like for us. And this was an opportunity to be determined to do it different.
I think the listeners, if they didn't listen to the first part, might assume the infidelity was the reason for the first divorce, but the infidelity and the later in life autism actually come in marriage part two. So with the divorce, there was not the infidelity yet. So what led to that first divorce, Kevin?
Great question. As I kind of shared a little bit, I think looking back, it was that autistic meltdown. It was the completely overwhelmed, not knowing how to handle a relationship, not having not knowing how to feel in being a husband, a father, just all of those things just started what it felt like just to pile up and was just so overwhelming that the only response that I could see that made sense was to leave. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the betrayal trauma and rebuilding trust and safety, but even before the infidelity, there was broken trust and safety because of the relationship, the undiagnosed autism, the divorce, and then all of that came with it. That was already there for trust and safety. And then the infidelity gets added, the betrayal trauma magnified that. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so for me, for sure. Because it came at such a shock. We weren't even 3 years. We were close to 3 years into marriage, and we already had one child. So he was only 8 months old. So this didn't make any sense to me. You know, you signed up to be married. We have a child. We have a new home. And all of that building up, that we were going to some like newly married, you know, like therapists we found. We thought it was just quote communication issues. And then all of a sudden it was, I can't do this. And that was such a shock, because that breach of trust, even that you're in this and you're faithfully in this, was such an abandonment for me then, right? His leaving then created such a wound for me that took me a very long time. In fact, I did not think we were getting remarried ever. Like, this was not part of my plan at all.
Either.
Yeah, his either originally. And you know, we weren't remarried till for 3 years after that. But that really was such a breach of trust, and really the vows he made and the integrity that he could be trustworthy and stay through the hard things. And so you compound that then to, you know, 3 years later, he's building trust. He's saying, I will never do that again. You know, we did a lot of work in our courtship the second time, even a little bit more thoroughly. Now, there was still things that happened in breach of integrity later, which was the infidelity, and kind of, I would say, a running in a different way, truly, for him. So some things had been gotten better through therapy, and your walk with God and that sort of thing. But also there were still some really deep things that needed to be overcome. That's why we use the word recovery too. So yeah, so there were layers on that, even before the autism was even considered. So. Yeah.
And I think I would maybe just add to that. So, so my infidelity has been 15 years ago, next month, and worked very, diligently on a recovery program for sobriety and recovery. And we were probably 7, 8, 9 years along recovery and doing well with that. We were connecting. I was building trust. We were doing those things, and I feel like we were kind of moving past the infidelity, but it was kind of like those magnets again. We weren't where we wanted to be, and it was really discouraging for both of us because we both wanted more, but we just couldn't figure out how to get there.
So go back to the separation gap in the divorce. Tell us a little bit about the story of the how you got back together, because I'm interested, Kevin, from your perspective, what gives you the so after I hear the story, I'll know a better question. But how do you mentally overcome what just was? Because a lot of times when you get to that point, re-entering such a thing is filled with so many different mixed emotions. And if you were already flooded, the crawl back to that, or whatever analogy you want to
Yeah.
pick, is remarkable. And I think how you processed, how you worked through it, gave yourself the desire, strength to do such a thing is a valuable story to anybody listening.
Yeah, it's the road between my condo and the counseling office was well traveled, for both of us, during that time. And I, I certainly did a lot of work during that time, but not to be all spiritual, but this is for Christian couples. It was God. It really was. I never thought that we would get married again. We had a great relationship. We
Outside of marriage.
uh,
Let's not.
yeah,
Yeah.
but a lot of the common things in marriage that cause problems, finances, parenting, those types of things,
We did that. Okay.
we did all that really
Okay.
well. And so I mean, I can even remember having a birthday party for our son when we were divorced, and a friend of yours or mine or somebody had said, "Gosh, if I didn't know you guys were divorced, like we wouldn't know you guys. You can get along, you can navigate that." And I really started just thinking to myself, like, yeah, I wonder what this could look like. I wonder what, with some healing and with some repair work, I wonder what this could look like. And I think that's kind of really how the conversation started.
And I had some really strong boundaries, I'll say. Like we weren't together at all. Like it was business meetings about our kiddo, and it was pretty like strong boundaries in, what the line was now because we weren't married. He left. And so I held that, and he honored that too. But yeah, I think to see what that difference was and to see what you had said, he wrote me a letter is kind of how this even came about to consider dating again. And in that, I remember you saying, like, I've made a great mistake. Like, I think that ownership of I've made a mistake, like this has taken me
it was wrong.
years. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And to recognize it had taken him years to come to that. I mean, the one thing Kevin didn't do was blame me in the divorce, like, which that isn't everybody's story, but he took a lot of ownership for there's something going on for me to need to leave like this. I'm not going to. Now we've had our fair share of blame and projection and things in our relationship, but that was not one which even allowed for the amicability, just having a friendship enough that probably was easier for you, I would say, you know,
Mhm.
um,
To be
than
able to
being
come
in
back.
marriage. I mean, at the time until to be able to come back. So
Yeah.
does that answer that, Dan? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a hope story inside of that. Just that little window
Mm-hmm.
says, both of you are saying we're done. This doesn't go anywhere. And then,
And legally it is.
It was.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Yep.
a comment at a birthday party ignites a and that's where it starts.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder. And so, what does it rekindle? I mean, I'm curious, did it rekindle or do you think it started afresh?
Mm.
That's a really good question. I think a little bit of both, maybe. Because at least for me, I never, well, the funny thing is I would say I never fell out of love, yet I would argue that I even knew what love was or what it meant or what any of that was at the time anyhow. But I think for me, I was seeing a therapist. She had said to me, I think just kind of in passing, we had talked about faith, and she had said, "When's the last time you had been to church?" And it had been a while, and so I went to church that Sunday for the first time in a while, and the sermon, the message was on forgiveness, and it talked about how the pastor was sharing, you need to forgive yourself in order to, move forward in life. You need to forgive hurts that have happened to you. You need to ask for forgiveness of those that you've hurt. And that's really, I think, what sparked it of I need to ask forgiveness. I've done damage here. And basically that was, I would say, was the rekindling. And then The new part of that, for me at least, was both of us. It was a 3 year period, and you think, oh, 3 years isn't that long. The growth that both of us went through in that 3 years. I mean, I was seeing Shauna become a completely different person. She was becoming independent. She was, being a single parent. She was, working, and not that she wasn't working before, but like just seeing this confidence in her and all of that just really drew me to wanting to try that again.
So we've had this, what in the world's going on? Divorce, lots of therapy, lots of work, the sermon, forgiveness. So ownership, plus I need to ask forgiveness. You start courting again. How are you courting different this time from the last times? You said there's some boundaries in there.
Oh yeah.
So that's the second courting look like?
Let's see. That letter, I just wanted to throw it away, if I'm honest. I was like, oh no, 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 no. You don't get this chance. Like now we're, gosh. Yeah. I mean, by the time in the state of California, it took a full year for the divorce to be final. So not all states are like that, but back then it took a full year. And so I did not want that letter, if I'm honest, at first. Like there was no, yay, my family's back together. It was, oh gosh, oh no, 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 no. So, but for me, I think the biggest growth for me was not letting Kevin sway my decision, but really feeling like really seeking the Lord to say, what would you have me do? And I wrestled that out with the Lord. And just saying, I just remember sitting on a rock. I was going to a single parents retreat of all places that weekend. So I tucked that thing in my bag and was like, I'll see you on the mountain letter. But, and so I remember just sitting on a rock, just God, what do you want this to be? Because I don't have anything. Like, yes, would I like my son to have his mom and dad back together? Yes. Would I like to have more children? Yes. But I don't know. I've done a lot of healing work and I don't know about this, it was risky. It was risky for me.
He hurt me once, he can hurt me again.
Yeah. And there was a lot of risk in that. And I remember just the Lord just gently, like just whispering kind of to me of just like, I just want you to just go on a date. I just want you to see what's different. And, and not everything was different about him, but there was enough that I could say, okay, like I do see a lot of change. The ownership went a long way. And so, looking at that, I wouldn't say it rekindled for me. In fact, it needed to grow. Like it was, I don't even know if a fresh start, but just, there were parts of him that I still knew, but I needed to step back in slowly, really slowly, because I wanted that, I wanted some consistency, which that was a harder thing for him to do, especially in communication or that sort of thing. Like, do you know me? Do you really know what I want? Or is this just about you? Is this just because you want our family together? I questioned that for a very long time.
Yep.
And we didn't introduce our son to this idea for months. And so anyways, it was a slower process for me. I mean, it didn't take years, but for me, it really was just a process of one day at a time and really asking the Lord, what do you want? And then getting to know one another at where we were then, which was far different from how we first met and just sped right into things super fast. So I really held boundaries physically, sexually, just I was like, we're not going to do this the way we did this before. And so that was something important to me. So
yeah. Let's fast forward a little bit. You're not saying much. That's odd.
You're thinking, and I can see that I feel the question for me.
So fast forward to the other side of infidelity and then go back to the moment on the rock. What
I'd be mad at God. I'm just saying. I'd be
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was like,
process that out for us, because that's an okay, go ahead, and then all of a sudden you're thinking, huh, what's going on?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I had some wrestles. And I do write about this in more detail, but I mean, face in the carpet, like, no, wrestling, truly wrestling it with God. And I remember, so going to the infidelity and when I found out about that. So we were remarried. Let's see, it would have been, about 5 years, 6 years, almost 6 years.
Almost 6 years.
6 years when I found out about the unfaithfulness. And there were multiple affairs that he would start and then stop and try and stop. And, that's where the addictive component came in for him. But by the time I found out about everything all at the same time. So it was multiple affairs, and it was the one text that came through that I found out about it. And I'll just say I went into full-blown crisis at that point. And where he was at the time, I just knew the Holy Spirit was like, there's something gravely off with his behavior the weeks and months before that. But it had happened over a series of a couple of years. And so it'd be like on and then off. And then anyways, in the behaviors with the infidelity. But first and foremost, we had 3 children by then. So I am invested in my family. I'm invested in the kids and trying to keep it, which I hear this a lot in the work that I do now, trying to keep, the kids stable. And so what does that do for mom? It puts a lot of weight. I'm saying in our situation, not that it can't be reversed, but the unfaithfulness. So I really took care of myself first in that. I wrestled with God. And I knew at that point I had a biblical out. So I remember sitting at the top of my stairs going, God, please release me. Like, please. And yet I was like so torn with release me, yet he's repentant of this. And I do see him wanting to change. Like, but how could you have done this in the second marriage? Like, oh my gosh.